Hello, welcome to Class 14, Introduction to Rendering. The last lesson we learned 3D modeling, and we focused with solid modeling. And I took you through a bunch of the major editing and modeling routines, and hopefully you got a little bit of a feel, and maybe you even liked it. Well, if you like or liked modeling, I think you're going to really like rendering. That's where things visually really pick up and can be exciting. What I'm going to do in this introductory class is introduce you to the three basic components of creating a render. Well, I should say four, because I can't overlook the fact that you need a 3D model, right? You're not going to be able to render without a 3D model. So, assuming you have a 3D model, the next thing we would want to look at is adding lights and then materials. And then once you have lights and materials, you would add a camera. Right? You can see in topic 3, a camera. And the camera allows you to placehold, so to speak, the view that you want to do your final render and then save a file to it. Okay, and then there's some other things, exposure control and adding backgrounds. There is more to this, but these would be the building blocks to get you going. The book, the chapters in the books covers it real nicely. And with that said, I want to start out by showing you some renders that I did a couple of years ago. I was contracted to take a complex of rooms that is more of a gathering space for a condominium, and this is a bar area. And I modeled all of this in AutoCAD and added lights just like we're going to. The only difference between what you're going to see here and what I'm showing you today is I'm only going to show us the actual light itself. It's like a floating light bulb. Whereas in these illustrations, I created the fixtures that surround the lights. Okay? So here's one, and I'm going to go to the next one here that's looking down the other end of the bar. If you'll notice here, you can create custom images that any digital file can be used as a material. In this case, I think I got a screenshot of MSNBC or CNN, whatever I could find quickly. Okay, this is coming in through the front door, and you can see through the window on the left a bit. That's the one lounge area, and this would be the other that we're going to see. Okay, so this is the lounge area that we saw through the window a second ago, and then in this lounge area, looking in this direction, you're looking into that bar. Okay, and then finally, if you keep going towards the left, you would then see this larger gathering space. And I just found some photographs with trees and landscaping, and I use that as my backdrop to make it look like I'm literally looking through the windows to a scene in the background. And there's a sun object which shines through these skylights and casts these lights here along with the ceiling lights. Okay, so I mean that's looking pretty good. I think getting close to photorealistic, and if you can fool somebody even for a second to say that real or not real, you've done a good job. Okay, all right. With that said, let's jump on in so at least to see some of the the finished products. So I've given you a drawing that you need to download and open up, and it's just got some 3D objects that we can play with and add materials to. So we're looking at this from the top view. I'm going to switch to a southeast isometric. Remember in last class I showed you how to set up your toolbars along with your ribbon to make it easy to navigate around in the drawing. So I'm going to select the southeast isometric, and we're looking at a room where I just put in a backdrop. Eventually we'll put a camera here, and we'll be looking only at a certain area of that. If I had put 4 walls on there and a ceiling, you'd be not able to see inside there. Okay, so eventually you're going to possibly want to do that, and I'll explain that when we get to that. But while you're setting up your lights and materials, you need to see into the room. All right, with that said, what I'm going to do is begin with lights. And if I jump back to the topic for a second, there's about 5 different types of lights. We're going to look at 2 of the most common, point light and spotlight. A point light is like an incandescent light bulb or a light bulb that shines light in all directions and behaves like a incandescent bulb. The spotlight, self-explanatory. It's almost like a flashlight or a spotlight that you'd have on your porch or deck, shining a concentrated beam of light. And we have control over the intensities, for the spotlight, the cone of light. We can concentrate that, almost like if you had one of those flashlights that when you twist it gets to a real concentrated beam. So digitally, we'll be able to do that. And then we're going to jump in and add materials to surface. So when it comes to lights, the most important thing you need to know is that you should only add lights in the top view. Okay, so I'm going to have to jump back to the top view. And you can stay in shaded view, or you can go to wireframe. One thing before we add a light is, we didn't draw this scene, so how big is it, how small is it? So what I'm going to do is just go to the front view, and I want to measure the height of these walls. And that way I know when I have to add my lights, I know how high that I'm able to do that. I want to emulate a real world scene here. So 96. So these are 8 feet walls, probably typical to what most of you have in your houses, so you can relate to the size of this. And I think this table is 3 feet long, and the room itself, let's just throw a quick dimension in there to see, might be 20 feet or so. 183, yeah, it's about 15, 20 feet. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to go back to top view. And we're going to go to a different part of the ribbon, and that is in your visualize. Okay, so anytime we do materials rendering, that's going to be in the visualize tab. Okay, so select visualize, and all of this, these panels here are all related to rendering. And you're going to see here a light panel. And in the light panel, you've got this create lights. Now, the very first time that you add a light, and I'm going to select, I'm going to select the create light list. And you can see that there's 4 types of lights here. These are all meant for, basically for indoor lighting, with a little bit of an exception. Your distant light is like a fake sun. I'll get back to that. But you also have what's called ambient light. And ambient light is, imagine if you got up in the morning just before the sun rises. There is no actual visible light source, yet you can see. Think of that as ambient light. That's already there. So if you want to count that as the 5th light source, then of course the sun could be the 6th. But generally it's apples and oranges. You want to try to either do only indoor or only outdoor. If you were having an indoor scene like you saw in my rendering there where the sunlight came through the window, you would use a distant light for that. Okay? And again, reasons not important at the moment. Okay, so point light. Let's select point light, and that's the one that's on here, so you could either pick it from here or on the original picture of the button. So since it's already open, I'm going to pick the point light. Now, the first time you add a light, you get this dialogue, and basically what it's saying is, there are already lights in here. That's how we can see things in conceptual shading or realistic shading. But it's recommending that we turn that default lighting off. Otherwise, things are too overlit. So when you see this, and you'll only see it the time you add your first light, select the recommended choice to turn off default lighting. All right, now if I move my mouse away, you'll see that I have an orange circle. That is the icon for a point light. Now, I'm just going to go right in the middle of the room. Now, this is probably under the table, but don't worry, go ahead and click. And that's the reason why you might want to do this realistic shading, but I mean in wireframe shading. So I'm just going to click right here, and then I get this little list. Disregard the list, just press enter. All right, now I'm going to go to 2D wireframe, and we should see that, which again is likely under the table. It went to the 0 plane. Yours might have clicked on the tabletop, almost like it snaps to that surface. And the reason that mine didn't, I just noticed because I was doing some drawings earlier today, is I can see, I'm going to magnify this, that my dynamic UCS is off. Talked about that in the last class. When that's on, you don't have to set up your UCS or the X and the Y, and you're really only interested to make sure Z protrudes outward. Well, when that's on, all you have to do is move your mouse on the surface, and it'll automatically align Z to be perpendicular to it. I had that shut off, which is why it ignored my tabletop when I went into that. I'm going to turn it on. It should be on, okay? So if you glance down on the bottom of your screen and you see that and it's off, turn it on. And it's called Dynamic UCS. I'm turning that on. All right, so whether it was on or off, it doesn't matter. Make sure you select the light. We have no control over the height of the light. We just click in its location from top view. Once we do that, once we add the light, we have to go back and click on it, and then we control the height of it right here in your palette, geometry. And it's the position Z. See, mine's at 0. Yours might be 2 foot something, which is the height of the table, but it doesn't matter. We're going to bring it up to the ceiling height. Now, the ceiling height is 8 feet. We shouldn't put the light exactly on 8 feet like it wouldn't be in real life. We would, let's say, bring that down a few inches. Let's say we'll go 7 feet. I'm going to say 7 feet, let's say 10. And if that winds up being too close to the ceiling, sometimes you get this almost a burn look when the light bulb's right next to the ceiling. It's a concentrated light. But for now, good enough, since we don't technically even have a ceiling. All right. So there's my point light. Now, we're going to add 2 spotlights. We're going to do like a classic photography studio lighting where you have a point light, and sometimes that point light is behind the subject. They call it backlighting. I'm putting it right above. Then we're going to have a spotlight pointing in this way and another spotlight pointing in this way at the table, and that'll give us 3 points of light. Okay? So let's jump right in and do a spotlight. Now, spotlight, we have to go back to this list, open it up, and here's your spotlight. And when I select the spotlight, we have 2 things to be concerned with. We have the light's location, and then what is the light shining on. Okay, we didn't have that with the point light because the light shines outward in all directions, so there's no target, so to speak. In this, we have a light's location, and we have a light's target. So I'm going to come over here. I want to stay, this is my ground floor plan. I want to stay in the room with this. So I'm going to click right about here, and then I'm going to move towards the table. I'm going to go just beyond the table and click. And it gives you that list again, which we can disregard. I mean, you could go in and make changes within that, but let's just press enter. Now, remember a light, when you add a light, you have to be in top view, and when you click, it's always on the ground. So my spotlight's on the ground, my target's on the ground, and that's not going to be very effective. So let's just, don't click anything yet. Just rest your mouse on the light to see it highlight, and all of a sudden all these other lines show up. When you have a spotlight, you can see the yellow and you can see the orange. The yellow is what's called a hot spot. It's a little narrower band of light that's brighter. The orange called fall off, it's still a cone of light, but it's less bright. Think of in, let's say, Broadway or stage lighting, and you're on the stage and the spotlight's on you. It's really bright right in the concentrated area, and then the light gets dimmer and duller as it falls away from you. It's called a fall off. Okay? I'm going to show you a quick image of that in 3D. Okay? So this is right from our book, and this kind of shows you, this is the actual light up in space, and you can really narrow the band or the cone of your hot spot, right? Such as the hot spot of a spotlight is the area that receives the most light. The smaller cone is the hot spot. That's this here. The fall-off receives light, but less than the hot spot. A larger cone, which is this larger area, is the fall-off. And so we haven't seen that yet, because think of this as sitting on the ground, horizontally shining across the room on the ground. So what we're going to do now is lift that up, and you'll begin to see that cone take effect. Okay, so now go and click on it. And once you click on it, in your geometry, now we have two things to look for. We've got position Z and target Z. And right now, if yours is like mine, you're both on the ground. And whether yours is or isn't doesn't matter, because we're gonna set it to what we want. So the position Z, let's leave that on the ground for the moment. And the target Z we're going to leave on the ground. But the position Z, click on it. I'm going to lift that up so that it's up a bit high. Let's say 5 feet. I'm going to go 5 feet, enter. Okay, now you're seeing the two cones of light. Now, if you look in your properties further upstream in the properties, here's the settings, and they show it in angles. In other words, the hot spot has a 45 degree. This from here to here, that's a 45 degree, and the fall off, this angle from here is a 50 degree angle, right? If you were to measure that angle. Now, the hot spot can never be larger than the fall off. So if I went into the hot spot and I made it 60, then the fall off would automatically bump up by 1 and go to like 61. The most you can have this, I think, is 160. But, we're not going to do that. All right. Now, the other thing is we're going to add one more spotlight. And whenever you have more than one of the same type of light, you should name them. And you won't appreciate it at the moment, but you will when you start making changes. So all the way at the top of your properties, it says name spotlight 2. I'm going to leave the word spotlight in there because it tells me what type of light it is. But I'm going to get rid of the word 2, the number 2, and replace it with SE for southeast. So we know this is a spotlight coming in from the southeast. Okay, now later on we'll probably come back and we'll reduce the intensity, and there's a whole bunch of things you can do in terms of controlling it. All right, what we're going to do is add one more spotlight the same way we just did this one. So I'm going to go back and pick, since it's on the top of the list in the ribbon here now. So I'm going to select spotlight. I'm going to pick just inside the room over here, and I'm going to aim it on the other end of the table. Click, and then enter to accept that list. Then I go back to the light and click it, and I'm going to call this spotlight SW. And I'm going to change the position Z also to 60, which is 5 feet. Okay, so we've got this crisscrossing of lights, and we'll see what kind of interesting things that does to it. All right, now what we're going to do is switch to a southeast isometric. And I want you to zoom in closer. You don't understand this yet, but you will. When we do a render, it's as if it takes 2 steps back, which is annoying. I wish it didn't do that, but it always did that. So what you have to do is almost zoom closer than you need, knowing it's going to back up when you render. So get in about as close as I've gotten there. And in your ribbon, over here, it says render to size. We're going to see our first example of a render. Now, even though we're in wireframe, it's going to disregard that in a second. Select the render to size button, and it's going to open up a new environment, and this is called a render window. See how much smaller this is? It's almost as if it's out of the, well, it is. It backed up where it's out of the room. We are going to take care of that by adding a camera. But you're seeing for the first time, you're seeing actual light sources, you're seeing shadows, right? And all of that adds up to more realism. Okay? When we add a camera, it's going to also incorporate a perspective, 3-point perspective, which is true to life, so the image gets even more realistic. Then we're going to add materials and so forth, and and then the whole package starts coming together. So there's our first taste of a render. We could actually save this right from here. what you have to realize is that this is a raster image, which everything outside that in the AutoCAD world is a vector image. And you know you can zoom as close as you possibly can get and you don't lose image quality. But since this is a raster image, it's created with pixels. And if you roll your wheel mouse, you can see how quickly it gets blurry and breaks up because it is not a vector image. So, there's a whole other world that's beyond what I'm going to show you, but you would have to render it to a higher quality so that you can print it to a larger sheet and get that quality. But if you just wanted to save this, you would click this Save As button right in here, or you could print right from here. And when you click Save As, the default image wants to be saved as a PNG, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a more evolved JPEG. But if you like JPEG, you can pop that open and you have all the common image size or styles in here. And you would just give it a name and then the JPEG, or just leave it as a PNG. And then that becomes a file which you would then open that up in an image editor, let's say Paint program or Photoshop or something like that. And then you could do some editing or just use that to print. All right, I'm going to cancel this out, and I'm going to close my render window. All right, so we don't have to worry about this, zoom closer and it takes a step back. We're now going to add a camera, which I think we're a little out of step from our menu here. I'm jumping down to topic 3 before we do materials, but when we add materials, we're going to be constantly rendering, and if we create a fixed view, it makes the process that much faster. So that's my justification. So let's go back to close this other file out here, so I don't have to play tug of war with it. So let's go back to top view. And the other reason I want to add a camera is because the process of doing that is just like a spotlight. You have a location and a target. So adding a camera there's a couple of different locations. Since we have this toolbar out that we added last time in our workspace over here, remember that gear, the workspace where we created our own 3D workspace. There's a Create Camera button right at the end of it. There's also a Create Camera button in your Visualize tab of your 3D workspace. Okay? So I'm going to click it right off the button here, Create Camera, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in a little closer here, and I might be readjusting this, but I'm going to pick right here, and I'm going to go just past the table here and click again, and then enter when I get that list. Now, I don't know what the camera sees, but I do know that it's on the ground, right? So if you click that camera, you get a little preview here, and what we're seeing is actually a worm's eye view. We're looking straight across the floor where these are the legs of the table, and this is that back corner of the room. Now, you can click on this and make it conceptual shading or realistic, right? Conceptual is better while you're working on it, okay? But we need to lift this up. So over in our properties, I'm going to go with Camera Z, and I want to make that kind of human eye level. And average human eye level is between, let's say, 5 feet and 5 feet 3 to 4. Let's start with 5 feet. So I'm typing in 5 feet in the Camera Z. All right, you can see how that lifts up. Now I can see, boy, I'm in pretty close. I don't see much beyond that table. Well, we have a lens. Okay, we have a lens that's a 50 millimeter that is zoomed quite a bit. So we're going to reduce that to 35 millimeter, and you'll see kind of like the hotspot pull-off thing. This is going to widen, and we'll see more of the scene. So click on the 50 and reduce it to 35. Type 35, enter. You can see how we're seeing more of the scene here. Now let's see if when we render, if it still backs up. All right, so I'm going to leave it be. Hit escape, and I'll show you something really neat, which again shows the value of this toolbar. We have a camera. If I want to look through the lens of that camera in this empty window here, if I pop that open, there's my camera. click on that, and now my whole scene becomes the camera. And if I click on conceptual shading, that's what it's seeing. And it's in perspective, as you can see with the table legs angling inward. And that's a bit extreme. We could improve that. These are all adjustments that can be made at any time. Let's do another render, and let's see if we back up a bit. And, I suspected we would, and we did. It just doesn't seem as extreme as the, as just zooming without the camera. It's a little more predictable. All right, so there's our scene, and looks kind of lifeless. There's a lot of light in there, but everything is dull. Dull meaning not an exciting scene. So now we're going to jump into materials. Okay, so I'm going to close out the render window, but at least we have a fixed, predictable scene. When we're ready to do a test render, we could see, know what we're going to get. So I'm going to close this out. And what we're going to now do is jump over to materials. Now with materials, there's a lot to this, and it's all manageable, right? You don't have to dig too deep to be able to get some decent results here. But there's going to be 3 palettes that we'll interact with. There's the materials browser, there's the materials editor, and the texture editor. And the deeper you dig, the more details and realism that you can create. And, I love this. I can't get enough of this. So anyway, I'm going to go back into the drawing, and the materials browser palette is right here. Click that, and it's going to open up a pretty big palette. And, mine was open just off my screen here. Okay. Now, I'm going to set mine like yours is. Mine's already production ready, and yours is not. So I forgot I have to back this up there and get mine to look like yours, which is not a good look. Okay, so this is like the palette right out of the box, which is horrible to work with. Now, to navigate through this, think of, let's say, regular AutoCAD with line styles, and we would have to load up line styles on occasion, and we'd have to do that in creating layers. And then when we select that load button, there's a file with dozens and dozens of line styles. This is kind of like that, right? And when we load a line style, it puts it in the top of this list. So this is your document materials. It's not line styles. So when we select a material and we use a material, it gets added to this list up here. And sooner or later, you're going to balance this out, right? We want to see more of this and less, and more of the document materials and less of the library. But for now, we'll keep it. I think you're seeing 2 or 3. All right, but the way this is displayed is horrible. So here's what we're going to do to improve that. The 2 categories of type and category are useless. Never going to use them. They don't provide any help. They just clutter up the palette. So what we're going to do is put your mouse right in between where it says name and type, right on that thin line right in between there, and you'll see your cursor changes to the left-right thing. Once you see that, hold your mouse button down and just drag that right out of the way. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing in the lower section, right in between name and type. Right, you're going to put your mouse there, and you're just going to drag that right out of the way. Now we can see the names of things. Okay? Now, next thing we're going to do is be able to see these material samples a little better. And we do that by selecting this button right here. It doesn't look like a button, but that little black triangle. We're going to open that up, and we're going to increase the thumbnail size to 64 by 64. 256 by 256 is crazy giant here. So go to 64 by 64. And we're going to do the same thing in the upper section. I'm going to click this button here, but we're not going to go 64 because that's too big, and then we only see one category here. We're going to go 32, 32. Right? And you can increase the size, the length of your palette a bit to see more, and you can also widen it to see more names that appear here. But that's something you'll get the feel of as you work. you're working off a laptop, things are small, and you want to keep it compact if possible. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is to see the full-blown library, you're going to click here. It says Home. You're going to click on that little triangle, and then the Autodesk Library triangle. And you've got all of these categories of materials. And if you scroll up and down, it goes all the way from ceramic to wood. And all the black triangles mean that there's more in there. So if I click that, there's a subcategory of leather and finish. And then if I click flooring, there's carpet, stone. And if you click carpet, these are all carpet samples. Okay? All right, so let's start off by putting a wall covering on the wall. We could just paint it a color, but let's say, because we could do something that looks pretty neat, real easy, I want you to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the list, and you'll see at the bottom, wall covering. Select that. And you've got all of these possibilities here. Okay, let's say we'll choose something with a pattern. Let's say this floral brown. Let's see how that looks. If we don't like it, we can change it. But how do we add material? Very easy. You just hold your mouse button down on the symbol, drag it out, and drop it on the wall. Now, I did it. I don't see anything, and this is one of the most common mistakes. You're like, hey, what happened? Then you try it again. You should see that material instantly. The reason we don't see it is because of our visual style. Our visual style is conceptual. Okay? You have to be in realistic to see materials. Okay? Now, if you render, it'll still show the material, but to see it in the scene, go ahead and pick realistic. Now, it got a little dark. That's the trade-off here. That's why conceptual is good, because you can see it. In order to see this better, you need the lights, and the lights are going to be given to you by rendering. But I've got another trick up my sleeve to improve that. So let's do another render. Make sure that you can see camera 1 in here. If not, just pop open the list and reselect camera 1, and then select render to side. All right, and just like that, we've got materials on the back wall. Most of these materials, they scale nicely. In other words, little flowers or something are appropriately scaled. It's not like a hatch pattern that you have to increase or decrease. And there's going to be times, and we're going to see those, where you will have to do that. But a lot of them are just good. Okay? All right. Now, this scene is kind of dark, and the true reason for that is, 1, the spotlight's light's kind of concentrated. 2 is we don't have a ceiling and 2 walls. And this type of lighting is realistic enough, just like, if you look around you in the room, it's what's called photometric lighting and global illumination. Those are 2 key words. In English, that means that the light bounces. So the light bounces off the table, and it may just go out into infinity, right? Some of the light's bouncing off the back wall and the floor to help illuminate it. But if you don't have any walls for the light to bounce off of and hit something else to help illuminate it, it's going to be a little bit darker. And that's some of what's happening here. Now, there's something else we can do to improve this, and I'm going to close this out. Close out your render window, and in your scene, go back to realistic lighting. Excuse me. And in here, we're going to help illuminate this by what's called exposure control. And I'm going to go back to the list here. And exposure control is kind of the magic up the sleeve kind of thing. You can pull that out of your hat and make an immediate improvement. If anyone is a photographer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. On cameras, you would just change the old, the f-stop rating to let more light in or less light in. And that's kind of what exposure control does. Okay? So, to do that, go to where it says render right here, pick on the word render, and you'll see render, environment, and exposure. Select that. Okay? So again, you're in the render panel, select the word render, and select render, environment, and exposure. And I'm going to move this out of the way. You'll see all of this is palette-based, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I have so many palettes I can't see my drawing. All right, so here's the key setting here. And don't forget this, because this is what's going to make or break. It doesn't take much to move this around to make a dramatic effect. So we're on 8.8, and if you go to the left, it gets brighter. Don't drag the slider. Just get rid of the second 8. In other words, make it 8.0. And you'll see immediately the scene brightens up a bit. Didn't look like a whole lot, but let's do another render, and I'll show you something else that's neat. So you can see the top of the table immediately gets brighter, which helps illuminate the walls around it. Now, I'm going to show you something else that's neat here. I'm going to drag my render window up near the top of my screen so I have room, and all the way down in the bottom left here where it says level 5 in the circle with the down arrow, click that little down arrow. And what it does is it shows us all of the previous renders and keeps track of them for comparisons. In other words, the top one is the one we see here, but if you click on the next one down, it shows you that. And you can see the difference in lighting just by making a 0.8 of a point in the exposure control. Okay? So we're probably going to go back to this and lower it maybe a little bit more, or maybe we won't need to. Because the materials you use will have a lot to do with the amount of light that is either absorbed or bounced around. And the other thing we're going to do is widen the hot spot to spread that cone of light that you see right here. We're going to spread that out more, and that'll help illuminate around it. Okay, so these are all the little things that you do and can do quickly, right? It didn't take long to do that. All right. So, to change the cone of light here, what we're going to do is we're going to go to top view, because we have to see the lights to do that. So pick top view, and I'm going to select this spotlight. All right, I have to move my environment and exposure control palette out of the way. And when I selected this spotlight, the southeast, right, I'm going to go to the hot spot, and I'm going to make that, let's say, 120. I'm not quite doubling it, but I'm more than doubling it, I should say. Okay? Now you can see what that did. That really widened it. Okay? Now let's go back to the camera 1 and the realistic visual style, and let's do another render. Now, because we opened up this bottom list, this got smaller, but you can roll your wheel mouse in to jump back in closer. And that's gotten quite a bit brighter. And how do we know? Because you can click quickly on the ones before. You can see the floor got real bright. Okay? So we're going to do this one more time on the other spotlight, and then we're going to continue with materials. So I'm going to close my render window. I'm going to go back to top view. And I need to see my my other spotlight here. What I'm going to do so that I don't suffer from lack of screen space is I'm going to put this in auto hide, which is this little second symbol down here. Right? And then when I need this, I just rest my mouse on it and it opens back up. Right? And then I move off it and it collapses. So I'm going to select this spotlight and I'm going to go to the hot spot. Right, and let's say we'll make that 120, and you'll really get a feel for how much that widened. Okay, so that should really be brightening things up. And then let's go back to the camera 1, and then realistic shading. All right, and now let's add another material. We'll add a material for the tabletop. Let's say we want to make that let's see if we can get a marble for the excitement of this, a marble surface. So back to your material browser. Okay, and let's go to, let's see. Let's go to ceramic. Click the little black arrow next to ceramic. Let me just bring this closer to the front of the screen. I'm going to click the black arrow for ceramic, and let's click porcelain and see what we have here. These might just be solid colors. Let's go to tile. Yeah, I don't want anything too crazy. This would look like a bathroom sink kind of tile. Let's see if we have anything that's not too exciting, but adds a little. I think because we went with a brownish wall, let's go with this 4-inch squares mosaic beige. So I'm just going to drag this over and drop it on the table. Okay, and remember it's beige tile. So let's do another render. And that may be like a really absorbing light. Yeah, that's definitely, that's not going to win any design awards on that. So way too dark, way too busy. So if you want to cancel immediately, you're going to click this X up here. And sometimes it still renders and you have to hit an additional escape. Okay, and let's say we want a different material. So this gives you the impression that it's lighter than the actual reality. So I'm going to go with, let's say, anything. Let's try a mosaic gray. And if you obviously you can just replace one material with another. Okay. Now those are really tiny tiles. And let's do another render. See if that's any kind of an improvement. Yikes. Well, that's not too bad. One thing you see with this, first emergence of this is reflection, right? We're getting the reflection. So kind of strange that this would reflect that brightly. I'm not sure I like that, but materials have reflection capability. But you can see how easy it is to just get a totally different look. I think we'll do one more thing. Let's make this wood. I don't think I'm doing too well here with the tiles or the ceramics. So scroll all the way down to the wood, select the word wood, and we have a tremendous collection of wood here. And I'm going to go with a bright color, let's say cherry natural low gloss. Because if you go with too high gloss, you can see what happens. It gets distracting. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to drag this over and drop it on the top of the table. And good, I'm glad that happened. Notice the grain. The grain should usually go in the longer dimension. And let's just do another render, see how that looks. So can we fix that grain direction? Absolutely. It looks, acceptable on the sides. It's going up and down. If we wanted this to look like a realistic slab of wood, we'd have to change the grain on the sides, but I'm not looking to do that. But I think I like this better. The shadows are a little more crisp and there's not distracting reflections. So I'm going to collapse this list here. Right? And I'm going to just drag this out a little bit so that you can see all 4 sides of this image so it doesn't get real small on us again. That's what tends to happen. If it goes off this little border, then it shrinks it down. All right. So we'll come back to changing the grid direction on that after. I just want to get us used to adding materials. So I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to pick this up on part 2 from here. And we'll continue getting this thing to look more realistic. All right. So I'm going to close this out and I'm just going to hit stop and then I'll restart right from here.